Hello everyone, this is Kaustav here from Inside Stat and welcome to this next video where we talk about the calculate DAX function. Yes, so we are continuing our discussion from our previous video where we talked about filter context. What is filter context? So if you have missed out on the previous video, please go ahead and do check it out. Um, so Continuing with what we discussed in our previous video, filter context. How important is filter context in coming up with different calculations and extracting different insights from our data? Now let's talk about the calculate DAX function, which is also very important in the context of DAX analysis. When we talk about DAX, calculate will find mention in whatever discussion we talk about. So as I said, calculate is the most powerful and important function in DAX. You can think of it like a magic wand that lets you change how numbers are calculated in our reports, right? So if I have to give you a simple analogy, imagine you are looking at sales data for all your stores, all the stores combined. Now, normally, when you look at total sales, you see sales from all stores combined with all the products across all time periods. Now, calculate, when you use calculate, it lets you say, show me total sales, but only for states or only for stores that are in California. Or show me total sales, but only for the year 2023. So what it does is it modifies the normal calculation by applying filters. So calculate adds filters to our measures or to our calculations. Now let's see what is the syntax or what calculate does. So calculate, as you can see, it evaluates an expression in a modified filter context. So when we look at the syntax says calculate, we need to have an expression and then we need to have filters. Right? Now let's understand this in detail. So what is this expression and what is filter? So the expression in calculate is or can be a measure. For example, total sales or total returns. It can also be a direct calculation. For example, we are aggregating the sum of total sales, or we are taking out the average, we are taking out the min, max, count. Okay, but what it cannot be, what we cannot include in expression, we cannot include a static value. A static value is invalid in calculate. So we cannot put numbers. We directly cannot say calculate 100, 150, 200, so on and so forth. It also cannot take a column reference alone. Right? So if you give a column reference as from the table sales, include amount, and there are different amounts in the amount column, calculate won't be able to comprehend it. It won't be able to understand it. So we need some kind of an aggregation. For example, total sales. Total sales we know is an aggregation, right? So this expression needs some kind of an aggregation, and it can be a measure, or we can calculate that aggregation. We can use sum, count, so on and so forth. Filters. Filters are optional. Okay, now there can be one filter, two filters, or multiple filters. So these filters can be optional, but filters are the most powerful arguments in this function. Filters is what gives calculate the power to override filter context. Yes, you heard me right. Calculate has the power to override the current filter context, and it does so using the filters. Now, what are these filters? So these filters, as you can see on the screen, it modifies the data that is considered in the calculation. For example, if we are taking total sales and we come up with a filter, for example, like a region or maybe a product category, it will filter the total sales by that category or by that region. And these filters can be Boolean expressions, they can be table expressions, but please always remember they must be simple expressions with fixed values. Okay, and we will see an example of it, so don't worry about it. So as I said, filters can be one, can be two, or can be multiple. Okay, but filters is what gives the power to the calculate function, right? So enough of theory. Let's jump into Power BI and understand more about the calculate function. So in our previous video, we talked about something called as total sales. We came up with total sales, remember? So let's say I bring in a KPI card here and I bring in total sales in my KPI card. Okay. Now, everyone remembers the filter context. Let's say I bring in a slicer as a filter context. So let's say this slicer I bring in from the region, right? So these are all my regions, different regions. And I bring in another slicer. Let me bring in another slicer. Let this slicer come from the product categories. These are the different product categories, right? So these filters are now applied to this visual of my data card. So sorry. Okay, this is better. Now, when I click on Australia, this number will change. When I click on, let me expand this so that you guys can see it better. So this is accessories, bikes, clothing, so on and so forth. Now, this has been filtered with Australia. Now, if I click on accessories, this is 179. So if I deselect Australia, this is only for accessories. Now we are only looking at the total sales for accessories. Similarly, I'm looking at bikes, right? So this is the current filter context. Okay. Now, let's say I come up with another measure here. Now, if I go back to the table view and I look at the territory lookup here, I have a region called the central region. Okay, let's take the central region, and if I go to my product categories lookup table, I have clothing as a category. Now, let's say I want to look at total sales by filtered by the central region, and later on I'll bring one more filter, which is the category bikes. Okay, so first let's say I come up with a new measure in the measures table, and I call this central sales, the central region sales. Now for this I can use the calculate function. So I'll say calculate, the first has to be an expression. Look at this, it says an expression evaluates an expression in a context modified by filters. So let's say I call in my total sales. So my total sales is the expression, and now I have to come up with the filters, which is optional but very, very powerful. So what do? I come up with, I wanted from the territory, I wanted region, right? So territory lookup region, and since it takes a scalar value, it has to return a singular value. It can be a greater than, less than, not equal to, but it has to be one single value. Now I can say the single value is central because I'm looking at the central region. Okay, That's it. I close my function, enter. I go back to my KPI card. So now when I bring the central sales L as the field value here, and if you see here, this is not going to work because I already have a region central that has been already defined as a filter in the calculate function. So calculate overrides filter context. However, if I use bikes, if I click on bikes, see the number changes. If I click on clothing, the number changes. If I click on components, there are no values for components. If I click on accessories, the number changes. Why does it happen? It happens because my central sales does not talk about any filter that would override category name. However, if I now override this and say the category name is bikes, and let me update the name of this measure as bike central sales. Right, so I call this bike central sales. Look at this now. So now if I click on this, nothing's gonna happen because this is only for central. If I click on this now, nothing is changing because now the filter context has been overwritten by the filters that I have used in the calculate function. Now these are not the only filters that we can use in calculate. We can use some other filter functions like all filter, which we are going to talk about in the upcoming videos, in order to change the filter context inside the calculate function. But I hope you got the idea of how calculate works and why calculate is so important, because it helps us override the current filter context in any visual, which makes it very, very powerful. So that's all I have for today. I'll see you guys in the next video. The next couple of videos are going to be very, very important because we are going to talk about some more filter functions. By the way, calculate is a filter function. It comes under the DAX filter function category. Okay, so I hope you liked this video. If you have any questions, please put it in the comments. I would be more than happy to answer. If you have liked this video, if it has added any value to your knowledge repository, please do give it a like and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video. Till then, bye-bye.